It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
They have this view that anyone who needs assistance, any poor person, is irresponsible. And I've been asking, what did you spend your $250 per child on? How did you use that? Were you irresponsible? And interestingly enough, the responses that we got from people were, hey, I paid childcare, I paid groceries, I paid. One guy paid the blank out of his electric bill. Another person got some dental work. Not irresponsible ways of using the income, and in fact, I would argue very productive ways. And it's in my view that if you help these families, they're going to do better. And here to share some thoughts on where we are. In fact, he's the guy who wrote the article on Joe Manchin. Evidently told privately some colleagues that they just use it on drugs. I've asked our good friend Art Delaney to come talk with us. Art is a political reporter over at Huffington Post. He also co-hosts the Huffington Post political podcast. Arthur, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So let's start with the anonymous. It's anonymous at this point. He just told colleagues. How do we know that's accurate?
Well, it's something that's actually been talked about a lot among people who are following this on Capitol Hill for the last several weeks. We have it in our story. I wrote the story with my colleague Tara Golshan. We have it from two sources, and after our story came, first of all, Manchin did not deny it. We let them know about the story on Friday, and they declined to comment. But they knew we were putting this out there. And then after our story came out, NBC News separately confirmed it with some sources of their own.
Right.
So we're totally confident that this is what he said. And like you said, this is actually a very common conservative talking point about any program that gives people money, especially if it's poor people and there are no conditions attached to the money, which is the case with these child tax credit payments that go to virtually all parents in the United States. And so he says, yeah, they're gonna waste it on drugs, and he said that the paid leave would, West Virginians would go hunting with their paid leave. They'd call in sick and go hunting when deer season opens.
See, that's what he might do. I mean, maybe that's why he's missed some votes as well. But what we know from studies that have been done on this is, anytime you do these kind of programs, people use it where they need it. And sadly, most families in this country need food on the table, a roof over their head, and medical care. That seems to be the three things overwhelmingly spent with these funds. And I don't know why that's so hard to understand, because we have systems that are broken in all of those areas.
It's not an argument that's really grounded in an empirical. It's not like a factual thing, really. I'm sure there are some parents who would waste their child tax credit payment on drugs, but there's nothing to suggest it's like a lot of parents do that. I covered years of welfare drug testing bills during the Obama administration. There's just an explosion of interest in this. And it's, a few states did, more than a dozen states did enact a drug testing policy, and they turned up a vanishingly small number of positive drug tests as a result.
Yeah, if I remember right, Tennessee was was huge in this. They spent millions of dollars on testing and caught virtually nobody.
Right, and the whole concept actually went out of style after Barack Obama left office. I don't think that's necessarily a coincidence, but I do think state lawmakers were like, well, people keep pointing out that this costs more money than it saves, when it is ostensibly a fiscally responsible policy. It's something that is supposed to save the government money that would be wasted on drugs. But the testing is expensive and doesn't catch anybody. Now, Manchin's not talking about adding a drug test to the child tax credit. He's just saying...
No, because we already know that doesn't work.
Yeah, right. He's just saying, I don't want to give people money, they'll waste it. And you can't argue with it. It's just a way of looking at the government that has prevailed among both Republicans and Democrats for decades in this country. It is a very deeply ingrained way of thinking about government spending that actually seems to go out of style. First, there was these drug testing schemes that didn't yield great results for the policymakers behind them. And then there was the coronavirus pandemic, and even Republicans had embraced unconditional cash assistance. They sent checks to everybody twice.
Yep.
So there was this breakthrough moment, and that's what Democrats seized on to finally enact this monthly child allowance that is a standard family policy in every country in the world that we don't have, resulting in high child poverty. Democrats are like, look, the cat's out of the bag. Unconditional cash assistance is popular and it works. And so we've had it for 6 months, and now we're not going to have it anymore, it seems, because Joe Manchin just doesn't like it for these views he articulated in private, but not in public.
Right. And the weird thing to me, Art, I mean, the really weird thing is you said, things come and go out of style, and I'm looking at these tax credit money, and I can't help but think back to Milton Friedman. You know who Uncle Milty was, right? The Chicago school economist that the right just loves because he's the free market guy. He had an idea of a negative tax of giving each person in the country $6,000. So that they could participate in the economy. And it's what eventually morphed into the earned income tax credit that Reagan put into office, so into place. And you go, how is it that like you said, things come into vogue, they come out of vogue, and we never talk about the past and how things have either worked or not worked. This was a very conservative idea.
Well, every country in Europe started doing this after World War II, and Richard Nixon embraced it. He called it the Family Assistance Plan. Just giving parents money makes sense when you consider that children are expensive and they make it more difficult for a parent to obtain labor income because someone's got to take care of the kid. How are we going to propagate the human race by immiserating parents and letting the labor market punish them? People have known this is wrong for a long time. And it's a complicated story, but it has a lot to do with race, the way programs that gave people money at the state level and the federal level were used by poor people to do bad things. Supposedly, there were sensational stories. It was like a genre of newspaper story in the 20th century.
Welfare queen.
Right, of the welfare queen. And this is just a reflex, a muscle memory in American politics that it seemed we were growing out of thanks to Donald Trump and the coronavirus pandemic and Democrats building a coalition around the exact policy that they wound up enacting. They had planned to do this.
No, what's weird is, West Virginia is one of the poorest states in the country, one of the whitest states in the country. And I'm assuming this plan and some of the polling that I've seen overwhelmingly popular in that state. In fact, the newspaper there in Charleston, the Gazette Mail, they said, we need this so bad. Build Back Better backers say the bill would protect West Virginia's most vulnerable as Manchin resists. They've endorsed it. Virtually all of the politicians there are saying, no, Democratic politicians, we need this. And yet here they're not going to get it. So, I think about next month, on January 15th, when a check doesn't come, how many kids then go hungry by the end of the month?
Certainly more kids will go hungry by the end of the month, starting in January, than they did when their parents were receiving this monthly benefit. A wrinkle here is that there is actually forthcoming a lump sum amounting to half of what they would have received in this year, because the credit started in July. When you file your taxes, you can get a lump sum for the first half of this year, so that will be helpful. But that you won't be able to get that till February. So we know from monthly surveys of households and other data that the poverty went down among children like 30%, nearly 30% each month, thanks to this cash. It will go right back up.
That's staggering.
It's just arithmetic.
I mean,
It's arithmetic. Yeah.
that is a staggering number when you're talking about, if you're pro-birth, if you're pro-child, you're pro-life, this is something you should be celebrating. This is the way that we encourage people. If you're against abortion, this is the way you encourage people to bring children into the world because, hey, we're going to help you feed them. You're not going to live in a destitute situation. I mean, it just seems like this is just insane that we can't get 51 people, one Republican to go, hey, I'm going to take Joe Manchin's spot.
Well, it's funny you should mention it because today there is a Republican in the Senate who does love the concept. His name is Mitt Romney. He had his own version of this that actually would give parents more money than Democrats went with. But he doesn't, they disagree over how to pay for it. He would consolidate and eliminate some existing programs. But yeah, there are people who recognize that giving parents money is beneficial for creating families. And Mitt Romney's not alone, but he's the only one who's really embraced the idea of monthly cash, unconditional. And he put out a statement today like, all right, let's get to work on something like my idea. But I have talked to him, and I've talked to several other Republican senators who you might think would be into this. They're not. They want a work requirement. Getting rid of the work requirement is the whole point of this policy for Democrats. If a work requirement is just sort of a propaganda way of saying we will exclude unemployed people from the policy. If you were to do that, you would not reduce poverty. Like it would just go out the window.
Right.
So it's a non-starter. It's hard to imagine a compromise on that. But I mean, I guess that's what we'll have to look at if Manchin can't be moved. And things are testy. It does not seem like they're gonna get a deal with him. And
that's a scary thing. But I'm not entirely against the idea of a work mandate as long as there is something in there that says that government will be the employer of last resort. I know that the private sector can't, or more likely won't, create enough quality jobs for everyone. So there has to be the public sector that's going to step in and say, look, everybody should have some type of employment to be able to support their families. I believe in the therapeutic qualities of work. I believe in the idea that that through your labor, you're supporting yourself, does give you some bit of self-esteem, and there are good things with that. But to say, hey, go find a job and magically expect people who don't live on a bus line or near any jobs to go magically find one is idiotic, and I would argue just plain mean.
Well, yeah, and if they've got kids, they can't, or the kid will die, right? Like, someone's got to take care of the kid. You can't have a job and parent simultaneously. You can't get a job that supports your whole family if the other parent isn't also working. It's just the way it is. The labor market does not value families at all, and so the public sector has to figure it out. Unless we're good with just immiserating parents and putting children in child poverty, even though it makes their lives worse and results in higher costs on society through their various problems they'll wind up having when they're adults. So it seems like there is we had a breakthrough moment. Maybe there could be another one where there's a big debate about this, but it seems clear at this point that there will be an interruption in the monthly payments and that child poverty will go back up in the month of January.
And the thing is, and this is the thing that gets me, Art, and maybe you'll disagree with me, but I guess maybe it's just I'm fortunate that I've always had a good paying union job, that I've made good financial decisions and been very lucky in my working years. But like $250 a month to me is not a lot of money. It's helpful. It's not life changing, but I look at the number of people that it is life changing to, and I go, how in your right mind do you go, you know what, we're just going to rip that out from under them? That makes no sense to me.
Well, and Democrats imagined that the idea of like increasing child poverty by 30% or doubling it, they envisioned it, being even more dramatic, would be simply terrifying to any politician, and that they could do the child tax credit with monthly advance payments for just the second half of this year, and then nobody would dare let it die. And they were wrong. People are happy to let it die. And their whole scheme was to do it for one more year after this year, and then it would be a breeze to reauthorize it at the end of 2022. And I did some stories like, well, are you sure about that? Seems kind of sketchy. And look what's happening now.
Yeah.
So there was a huge miscalculation. In the past, a temporary tax policy was a safe bet. You could keep it alive forever because no one wanted to hike taxes. And it just isn't working with this because people are doing old school welfare politics after Democrats had presumed we were past that. This is welfare to Republicans. It's welfare to Joe Manchin. And that doesn't work in the year 2021, surprisingly.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I've got friends who are going, no, we need universal basic income. We need, Milton Friedman's negative tax. And I'm going, we are so far from that. I don't even think you can begin talking about it because we can't take care of the most vulnerable. And for me, this discussion is, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. I was a poor kid. I can't imagine what that little bit of money would have done for my mother and I living in the conditions that we lived in. I know our neighborhood, there'd have been food at the end of the month. I know that for sure because it wasn't always assured. I know that people may have gotten, secondhand cars and gotten better opportunities at jobs. There were, who knows what the possibilities could have been. And we didn't get that. And I don't want that to happen to another generation of kids growing up the way that I did.
Yeah, well, your parents would have been a little happier, right? Like that. I've talked to I've been interviewing parents for the past week, and that's what they say. Like, I was getting by without this money, but having it made my life a lot easier. I had less stress. We knew we could meet expenses and even get ahead a little bit without having to use credit cards. So when the money goes away, people's lives will just be a little bit worse. It's that simple.
Yeah.
It's not there isn't this magic like soul destroying power of receiving money. That's the argument. Like people won't be as happy if they're not earning all the money themselves. If you're just giving it to them, it will impoverish their well-being. And it's just not true. If you give people money, especially when they don't have much, their lives will just be a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that $250 can be life-changing resources for people. And we've got folks who are saying, nope, sorry, you're on your own. That's angering and frustrating to me. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Arthur Delaney. Arthur's a political reporter over at Huffington Post. He's also the co-host of the Huffington Post Politics Podcast. You can check out their website, Huffington Post, huffpost.com, where you can find his article on Joe Manchin privately telling colleagues the parents are going to use the tax credit money on drugs. And I did find one parent who did use it on drugs, Art. I bought the kids insulin because they're type 1 diabetics. $450 they spent on the insulin drugs, where if the Build Back Better plan had passed, it would have only been $70. So it's just one of those things. But Art, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Quick break, right back. Stick around.
On the Rick Smith Show.